There you go. Okay. So we are back on what's only our third session, but lots of chapters to go over. So we read 8 through 11, stopping before we got to 12, right? Okay. And so before we actually get into, kind of talking the chapters, how did that work as far as length was concerned?
Fine.
Okay. Okay, they all say fine. What about you guys? That was fine? Okay. So when we talk at the end, we can do roughly the same thing. We can do more if you want to try more. I think we saw the story really picking up now. Even though the chapters themselves weren't very long, those first few chapters, it was more setup. And now the setup has shifted, and we're going to start getting into more of the meat of the story itself. And so it's going to, the pace is already picking up. All right, so let's recap real quick. Just before we get into chapter 8, let me remind us that we left last week at the end of chapter 7 by them landing on Malacandra, getting all their stuff out and together. They've been unloading, they had their little dinner, and then Ransom saw this mysterious creature, this very disconcertingly large and strange looking creature coming straight at him. He is convinced that is the Sorn that Weston and Divine had been talking about basically giving him to. And so off he ran on a distant alien planet into who knows what. And that was kind of our cliffhanger for starting our reading for this past week. He's just off. He's made the decision, better to take his chances in the complete unknown than be turned over for a meal or a sacrifice or whatever terrible thing Weston and Divine must have had in mind, because they have already demonstrated themselves to be pretty terrible people. Okay, is that a pretty good catch-up spot for us?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so he has started running. We're beginning on chapter 8. So what's happening?
It's running through the forest.
Okay, and it's a weird forest. This is not a terrestrial, earthly forest. What are some of the things that seem different about him running through this alien forest than might be running through a earthly forest?
The ground was soft and springy, for one thing.
Okay, good. So the ground itself is got this kind of strange pinkish moss. It's soft and stringy.
And above them were transparent large leaves filtering the sunlight.
Yeah, so we've got these trees that he's already kind of seen before, which look kind of just unnaturally tall and thin and rubbery, almost translucent, like plants underwater.
And the hills are pointed at the top and too small at the base.
Yeah. So
And they curve like a wave.
right, even the landscape is just kind of, it's somehow wrong in the way that his brain, it just doesn't make sense. So even the little stuff is all a reminder that this is not Earth. It just is not Earth. It's not anything that his brain is prepared to fit into an expected pattern. So this sensation, which we get a lot of within these chapters, making sense of what you're seeing. So when I mentioned a few times last week about the psychological experiment about chessboard, where a chess master can memorize a board very easily, as long as it has like like a real chess game in process, because they're seeing patterns. They're seeing something that's familiar. But if you just put random pieces all over a board in places where they wouldn't normally go, a chess master and a random person are able to remember those pieces about the same rate, because there's nothing for the person or the chess master to relate it to. And the reason I kept bringing that up is I think he does a really neat job of explaining things in a way that doesn't make sense. Like even his explanations are a little bit hard to follow, but I think that's on purpose. It's not because he's not good at describing things as an author. I think Ransom is having trouble understanding what he's seeing. So he's doing his very best to describe what so far is undescribable. Whether it's the plants, whether it's the rock formations, or as we get further on, whether it's the creatures that he encounters. And if you'll notice, it's a little subtle, but I think C.S. Lewis is such a good author, he's doing it on purpose. Ransom's descriptions will make more sense the longer he's there. The more he's around these surroundings or these creatures, the more his descriptions will become comfortable and sensible. And if you think about it, that kind of makes sense. Dropped into a completely alien environment, you're not even sure which way is up. So how do you describe stuff that makes no sense? It's like the chess master looking at a random board. It just doesn't make any sense. But the more time you're there, the more the pieces start to fit. And so suddenly what starts off as just almost stream of consciousness will slowly start to kind of come together in his mind, and he's going to be able to talk about it a little differently than he does early on. So what's his big plan running through the forest, by the way?
Would you repeat that?
What is his big plan as he's running through the forest?
To get away from the soldiers.
Okay, and so what does that mean, to get away?
To be safe.
Put some
With
distance.
distance. Those.
Yeah, he didn't really know anything. So he just kind of knows there was danger behind me that I know. Now there's also potential danger all around me and in any direction I come, but he's kind of made this decision. I'd rather run into a dangerous unknown than wait and see how the danger I do know will play out. Because he's not running in any particular direction, right?
Correct.
He's just trying to get away. Well, if there's no plan and you're just trying to get away and you're on an alien planet, what's probably going to happen eventually?
He'll encounter someone.
Could it
From
count?
that planet.
And he does. What else?
What he didn't really notice at first, it was beginning to get darker.
Ah, there's one already. So
He also realizes that the environment is different. It's lighter than what it is on Earth.
right.
Not
Right.
as
There's already
exhausting to him.
some kind of gravitational or atmospheric difference. And so he's able to maybe go a little further or faster or more strongly. I would like to underscore how recklessly dangerous this is, even though it's his best option. I'm not going to disagree that this is not the right thing for him to do, but he's just run off from his only source of food and water, his only shelter, and the only other humans and potential way for him to go back to Earth. He is not running to a second spaceship. He is running into absolutely who knows what. So best case scenario, what is he running into? Like becoming Robinson Crusoe or something, right?
Right, the unknown.
Yeah, he's not running back to Earth. You can't do that. He doesn't even know what planet he's on. So did you catch where he was trying to deduce where he might be? What were the sensible options that he thought?
Moon is one.
Thought maybe the moon.
Venus, the moon and Mars.
Okay, so the moon, Mars, and Venus, and he's kind of extrapolated that, I think, based off of a few things, not the least of which is how long they were traveling.
Something also about they always saw only one side of the moon.
You know, and that because of the distance of the Earth is pretty visible as though it were our moon, just larger. So he's pretty sure he's not too far away from the Earth, but he's not exactly sure. Is this Venus? Is this Mars? Or is this the moon? Now, this doesn't look like the moon that he has seen. Is it conceivable, though, that it's on the opposite side? And poor Ransom is just not very good at this because it's not his field of specialty. So I believe he decides it's most likely not the moon, but he can't decide between Venus or Mars.
He did say that he figured Venus would be a lot hotter than Earth.
Well, I think he was trying to remember if that was the case. That he wasn't completely sure about that. And he was a little bit annoyed at himself for not knowing what were probably pretty rudimentary facts.
I like the way he talks to himself too. It's a kind of a reassurance, I believe.
Yeah. So there were a few moments. Anybody remember or have marked some of those moments? Because they were kind of nice. Well, he definitely gets to a point of delusion at some point, but there's, if you have ever been on your own long enough, for whatever reason, I think pretty much everyone starts talking to themselves. Not out of a crazy sense, but just out of a sense of hearing a voice. I talk to myself all the time, and it's mainly because it's like my thoughts just out loud. And so we get some of that where he's clearly talking out loud, but there's a bunch of statements that's kind of like, it's okay there, buddy. I'm here for you.
We'll look after you.
We'll look after you.
We'll stick together.
We'll stick together.
Stick together, old man. Old bean. Yeah, there's I found a kind of sweetness to his, like, I'm here on my own, but I'm not giving up. And the best way for me to express that is to say it out loud to myself.
And along in that, he says, we're not gonna stay all night. We're just gonna rest a bit.
Yeah, we'll just rest a bit here. Yeah, sure.
Next morning.
So there's also a few descriptions that I think are worth just kind of remembering for a moment, but this will happen in a couple of places where he becomes very mindful of his own body, and in a very grateful way, but in a way that on Earth he wouldn't have ever paid attention to. But if you can imagine for just a moment, being in an environment that is so completely alien and foreign and upside down to you, that the only thing that makes any sense, that you have any context for and any familiarity at all, is simply your own body. But after looking at weird plants and weird rocks and weird formations and nothing that makes sense, even looking at your own hand might have a sense of comfort that at least this makes sense to me. Because pretty much everything else in his entire existence is now changed and doesn't make any sense.
Even not sure that he was Ransom. Was he who he was?
Yeah. All right, so he runs and he runs and he runs, and it starts to get dark, and a few immutable consequences occur. So by leaving Divine and Weston and the camp and the ship, he kind of put himself on the clock for what? There's a practical limit to something, physical. What's the first limit he hits?
He's thirsty.
He's thirsty. And this seems, almost too simple to talk about, except for the fact, what is he going to drink? If you were in the forest on Earth, you would at least have some hope that you could find a source of water, a spring, a river, a lake. You can maybe find certain plants that store water, or you can dig a hole and hope to find water. But he's in a place where if I get thirsty, and everyone is going to get thirsty within a matter of hours, not weeks, not months, hours. What do?
The water is peculiar that he sees.
It's super weird.
It's blue and it's warm.
It's actually blue, not like the sea is blue, but like the color is blue. And it's thick and it's warm. And does any of that sound like what you would go to first when you're dying of thirst? No.
No.
But he basically finds that the water itself is warm enough that it actually is helpful to sleep by, which is kind of neat. It doesn't seem like a hot springs if you've ever seen hot springs, because those get super hot. But there's almost like a radiant warmth from these rivers that he's running past. And then finally he's so desperate. I'm either going to die of thirst or I'm going to die of poisoning from this blue liquid. But imagine how thirsty he has to be before he finally decides it's worth the risk. But he does, and he drinks. It is drinkable, it's good, but it's just weird. Anybody ever traveled, most especially somewhere overseas, where they have none of their drinks are cold? They don't serve ice. And
Yes.
Yes.
Either because of a lack of refrigeration or a lack of custom, everything is room temperature or hotter.
Went to France and we were at a restaurant and I asked for ice and they brought me 2 little cubes.
Right. They don't know what to do with you. You want ice? What's ice for? But there's just something you get used to, right? And if you can imagine, even when you're hot and worn out and exhausted, if the only thing that you have is kind of warm to drink, I don't know. At some point, it's kind of frustrating. All right. So he has managed thirst, which is the most pressing need. You will die of thirst far before you die of hunger. You might be able to do without water for a couple of days, but that's pushing your luck. But he's now realized that this liquid, whatever it is, works. So what does he try for food?
Then we cut it into a tree.
Yeah, so remember, he didn't have that knife with him. Like, that's his only tool. He took that knife from the ship early on because he was going to defend himself, and he manages to cut some of a tree and see if that's edible.
Yeah.
And did that solve his problem?
So hard
It was what?
like wood.
Hard like wood?
More.
It was like gum.
He was able to chew it
We couldn't swallow.
to nothing. Yeah, that, you want to eat, but you can't swallow something that's of limited help. But he manages to kind of take some with him. I sort of see this as a survival technique. You're hungry and you can't eat, but you can chew on stuff, and at the very least, it just kind of occupies you. So he's still not doing great, but he has survived his first day. Does he have a plan yet?
No,
Nope.
Oh.
So it's still just kind of aimless. So.
He has those yellow animals that come through and they eat all the leaves on the tops of the trees.
Yeah,
And he finds them very pleasant and thinks perhaps they could be trained as dogs and would be a source of food for him.
okay. So these kind of almost giraffe-like creatures that are able to eat the tops of these trees and let in a little more sky and light and everything else. So he is not alone in the sense of like a barren wasteland, but he is alone in the sense of people. And were you surprised at all when he said he would even like to see Weston and Divine again?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, can you identify with that?
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, at some point, just the overwhelming reality of I am the only human on an alien planet with no hope of going home. It's just an existential crisis. And to have even a miserable, dangerous person with you is still a person.
The known instead of just the unknown.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, he's still trying to take in his surroundings. He's still trying to figure out how to make sense of the trees and the hills and everything else. And we have, you know, I think the most significant encounter to date, and it kind of changes everything. What does Ransom mean?
Rasa?
That's right. So he meets, I mean, first he would just, it's just a creature to him. So what is this creature like?
What is this creature? What?
What is this creature like?
Narrow conical head.
Okay, a narrow conical head, like he described it on several occasions as being like a bullet.
He's furry?
It's furry, but not shaggy fur. What kind of fur?
Silky fur.
Yeah, and I get the impression very short cropped, very fine hair, because he describes a couple of animals in particular that most reminds him of.
Well, he talks about a seal.
Seal. So seals are furry in a sense, just not furry like a Pekingese, but it's a very smooth, silky, very short fur. But it's-
Yeah, he mentions the otter also. So
my mental image of the Rasa is kind of like a giant, skinny, out of proportion seal or otter.
It has hands that are spider, almost transparent.
Is that the same? Okay. So long, you said long hands, almost transparent. He's got jaws in the mouth. He thinks they're not quite like a carnivore, but if you've seen the teeth of a seal or an otter, as cute as otters might be, have you ever like seen the teeth? They're sharp. They're relatively small, but they're sharp. And you know, pictures of like otters playing and frolicking in the water is really cute. But if one bit you, it would hurt. And so, and this thing's, what's the size of the Rasa in relation to Ransom? Bigger or smaller?
bigger.
Bigger. So you've got this unknown creature that's bigger than he is, and it clearly has teeth.
And he's decided it's looking for him.
Okay, so it's looking for him.
And it's bottom 52.
On 52. If you're at the bottom of 52, then we're not on the Harasa.
Oh, I'm sorry.
52.
It's a sentence that he was, they made it certainty that it was looking for.
Huh, 52?
Am I reading? I'm sorry, 54.
Okay. Nope, he has seen another Sorn,
Yeah.
which just causes him to freak out and run again.
Yeah.
But here after that
Okay.
is where he has met the Harasa. Okay, so just to point that out real quick, in his wanderings, he sees what he assumes is another Sorn, and so he takes off running again, and in his running, he basically slips and he falls and he rolls into the water. And it's in the water that he encounters this
Okay.
giant seal-like, otter-like, weasel-like creature. Now, there's a neat long description of this initial interaction. So somebody want to maybe talk about that interaction a little bit, because it's really an interesting few pages.
Preacher started talking to him first, and Ransom realized he had a language that he was actually talking. And
So noises that he does not recognize.
right,
And you know, we don't know what kind of sounds this would have made. And, you know, again, a creature that definitely looks far more animal than human. And I think that's on purpose. He mentions that he has a level of comfort in looking at the Harasa that seems better than looking at a Sorn. And do you recall why? He's more interested in the Harasa, where he's more terrified or repulsed by the Sorn. Remember what he says?
He knows,
looked directly at him like he was studying him as well.
and he has a past history where he knows he was supposed to be turned over to the Soren.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also an appearance element. The Sorns look very strange and they look elongated and kind of transparent, but do they look kind of like? We sort of mentioned also reminds him of seals and otters and weasels and that kind of thing. So do the Sorns look like animals?
No,
No. He kind of describes them as being giants. And he says he can see a face, but the face is very elongated, it's very strange, and it sort of disturbs him. And so he mentions this somewhat offhandedly, but not completely. But I would liken it, he never says this phrase because this phrase hasn't been around, you know, that long, but basically the uncanny valley. So the uncanny valley is a psychological response to things that look close to being human but aren't, are more disturbing to us the closer they get. Meaning, a mannequin is creepier than a dog. Well, a dog can be very strange and different looking from us. A mannequin looks more like a human, so why would a mannequin be more disturbing than a dog? Or why do some computer graphics that look cartoony don't bother us? but when they start looking photorealistic, they look creepier. You've noticed that phenomenon?
Mhm.
So psychologically, that's referred to as the Uncanny Valley, and it's basically, it's a chart. The valley is the spot on diagramming that says the closer you get to looking like a person without being a person, it becomes less pleasant.
Mhm.
And whether that's some kind of, inherent response in us or what, but basically, I think he feels more comfortable and interested in the Harasa because it looks like an animal, discernibly like an animal. It does not look like a human.
You can tame animals, you can't tame him.
Well, at the very least, it just doesn't look like a human that's wrong. And I will say that the strange, weird, uncomfortable feeling we get when something looks like a person, but it's not, it's because maybe it's something we're supposed to identify with, but there's something wrong about it. Whether if we can put our finger on it or not, but it feels wrong. Whereas if it's an animal, it's not trying to be a person and failing. It's an animal. Does that make sense? So anyway, I'm suggesting that he's more interested and less creeped out because the Harasa looks nothing like him. And if it had actually looked more like him, he may have been more disturbed. But here's maybe the neatest thing about this. He hears these noises and he recognizes, like you said, language.
That's his thing.
That's his thing. Who else transplanted on an alien world would have been able to hear the sounds coming out of the Harasa and identify intelligible language? Maybe no one. But it took a philologist, it took an expert in languages, not a physicist, not whatever divine was, maybe none of us. But his expertise is maybe all the difference between realizing that this was an intelligent creature and not just an alien animal making noises. All sorts of animals make noises, and all sorts of noises have patterns and things to it. Whales make sounds and birds make sounds, and there's a variation in the pitch and stuff like that. But he is able, because of who he is specifically, to recognize something. And then he uses a description of what happens next, and what you would refer to in science fiction as first contact. So the first time two alien species ever meet. And he describes it as courtship. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
What about this looks like courtship?
One would take a step forward and the other would take a step back, and then they reverse that. It was kind of a funny little dance trying to decide, do I trust you? Do I want to approach you?
Right.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. And then finally, the creature offers him a drink, but he's gotten water from whatever that place is, river, and he puts something from his belt in it. And first he drinks, and then he makes another one. And Ransom really liked it because it appeared to be alcoholic.
Right. Oh yeah, he seems. Oh yeah, that's for sure. That's what it was.
So he's offering him hospitality.
Right. So this is a very, if not a human thing to do, this is a very intelligent person sort of. It's clearly not an animal in the way that we would define animals. This is much closer to how a person who cannot speak your language in a completely foreign environment might respond. The proverbial lost tribe on an island that's never encountered anyone outside of their island. How how do you establish any kind of contact? And it seems very familiar to this. And so that courtship, there's a mutuality of this, which I think is really neat. It's not just Ransom, you know, I want to pet the dog and the dog is skittish. They both recognize something in the other and they want to figure it out, even though clearly it's not easy to do. But they want it enough to keep trying. So the one step forward, two steps backwards kind of thing is happening from both sides. And that is kind of neat. And again, maybe it's only Ransom who could take those sounds and already from the first few minutes is able to understand and begin some kind of level of communication. And he even starts planning out books on this alien language, right? Only the philologist would start assuming the academic papers he's going to be able to get out of this moment. But so remember when we started our discussion a few minutes ago, I talked about the more he's around the environment, the more things will make sense to him. So even something as simple as getting the cup of water is alarming at first. Do you remember why? The sort of somewhat gross reason why?
He misunderstood what he saw.
He didn't understand what he was looking at on the body of the rasa. What he assumed were genitals, meaning the thing was peeing in the cup. He realizes he's looking at a belt, he's looking at a tool, he's looking at pouches that allow this creature, this being, this intelligent being to carry things. He wasn't peeing in the cup, he was mixing them a drink. And I like the universality of the hospitable action, drinking together. There just seems to be, and the funny thing is, so much of this, my reflexive action is to say how very human. But I think that's part of the stretch of this book. The Hrasa are not human, not even a little bit. And I think that's being stressed early on. They're so different that he has to piece together what they look like and how they operate. And even later on, as he's learning more of the language, what was it water itself that had sounds in it that the human mouth cannot reproduce?
All right.
But he starts understanding more and more, and there is an intelligence, a sentience to this creature, and it's not, there's what a very human characteristic, because that's kind of like imposing something on them that it's not that they share something that we already have, it's like we share something in common that's above us both. Does that make sense? It's not that, and early on, you can only understand them from your own point of view. But even within the chapters we've read, he's just seeing them as they're creatures that are similar to me, but just completely different. But they are,
turning this around.
yeah.
Ransom is amazed at this other creature. But on the other hand, this other creature doesn't see humans every day. He's equally amazed at what is this stranger that's in my world? I've never seen this before. He's as curious about what he's faced with as Ransom is.
Yes. Now, this interaction and it's kind of really beautiful and joyful as it is. Can you imagine either Weston and Divine and what would have happened if they were the human encountering this process?
And didn't approach each other in a hostile manner. It's interesting that each of them approached the other not with just curiosity, but also with friendship.
That's right. There was,
Harmony.
this was truly mutual. Not only was
Yes.
Ross intelligent enough, but also open and interested not in a, I want to cut him open and see what's inside, but in just a very, not benign curiosity. It's almost it's a constructive, helpful curiosity.
Just think how you would act if you opened your front door one morning and saw a strange creature that didn't look like a human standing in your front yard. How would you react, or how would I react under that circumstance?
Absolutely. And so I think, this is I still use this one with some frequency. I believe it originates with Maya Angelou, but to me, it's a Priscilla thing. When people show you who they are, believe them. So Weston and Divine showed us for chapters who they were. They could say, oh, I'm a world-class physicist, or I'm a brilliant scholar, whatever. But we saw who they were. And now in this moment, regardless of anything that people might say, we see who Ransom is, and we see this cross, who he is. And
I think Weston Divine probably would have tried to kill him.
maybe should try to kill him, try to maybe tie a rope around him, something.
Yeah.
But instead, there is, again, it's so mutual between the two of them. And that's one of the first interesting things, although it's only going to get, I think, more interesting from there. So already you're starting to get a few words, the land and the sky and that he's a Haman. I kind of like the H on top of everything. And so after this, kind of courtship dance, and they both figured out that there's no sense of harm here. There's the danger, if any, is that they may just kind of not understand each other. I don't sense any moment of physical danger here. Yeah, so after this, kind of starting the ball rolling, what happens next after this kind of?
They get in the boat.
Right. So he very clearly beckons for Ransom to accompany him, and he does. Now, what's got to be running through his mind at this point? Where is he going to take me?
What's gonna happen?
What's going to happen? And you would be very, it would be very understandable that even as cooperative as this introduction has been, he still doesn't really know what's going to happen next. And so we get kind of this sort of explanation about the boat trip and just how different it was, and he's still trying to make sense of his circumstances and environment. He's looking at the land and how it rises and falls and the weird peaks.
Give him something to eat.
They've now eaten a little bit. And so and it wasn't all that easy for him to take. He starts getting seasick. There's that sort of fun. And I think he's somebody who he even mentions, well, I'm pretty good on the water, but he's not good on this. And I just, boy, I felt for him when he throws up. And it sort of just all hits him at once. Like, number one, I don't know if these creatures experience throwing up or not. Maybe this guy has no idea what's going on. Or maybe he does. And like, I'm the first human to be encountered by the species. And what do? But I barf.
Yeah.
Like the, you slip and fall and look like a dummy kind of stuff. But there's also this, there's just a real raw humanity to, he's sort of trying his best, but it's not exactly the most favorable impression you can come up with. All right, so that's going to take us to our last chapter. And the last chapter gives us a bunch to think and talk about, but it's kind of predicated on something in particular. At the end of the boat trip is what? What's the destination to the boat trip?
The village.
A village. So no longer a single hras, but the hrasa, the collective. There is a village. There's a bunch of them. There's old ones and young ones and male ones and female ones. And he's there for weeks. So he's there long enough. But what's the most important thing that shows the passage of time?
Learning the language somewhat.
Language. He is actually communicating with them with a level of fluency where they can actually talk about some pretty esoteric stuff. It's not, you Tarzan, me Jane kind of stuff. I mean, they're actually holding these pretty detailed conversations. He's starting to pick up differences between them. He's starting to pick up, he can not only pick out the males and the females, but what the older ones and the ones he's starting to pick up their personalities.
Their customs.
Pardon?
Their customs.
Some customs. So in general, what are some things that he's learning from being around them these last several weeks?
That they're not a warrior type people. They're very peaceful people.
Very peaceful.
They're monogamous.
Yes.
They love poetry.
Their voices are singers.
They sing and they love poetry. So
They're really caring people. They take care of each other.
Now, this is where we get into an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah.
What are his initial descriptions of their level of civilization? Like he starts looking at them like an anthropologist might look and classifying them in a way that makes sense to him. He identifies their, like, on a civilization scale. Remember what he says?
Old Stone Age.
Yeah. So this is kind of a Stone Age, maybe sort of late Stone Age, because clearly they have multiple tools, and the way that they operate together does seem to have some complexity to it. But he considers this to be very primitive. So again, his context is Earth. So what assumptions does he make about their civilization since he believes they're primitive? Well, here's one thing. They teach him a lot of interesting stuff about the planet that he's on. Still hasn't identified it by name, other than Malacandra, but they teach him that the Rasa are not the only intelligent beings. What else occupies Malacandra?
Two other village types.
Well, there are other villages, but there are actually other creatures. So instead of calling them Sorns, they refer to them as
Saronis.
Saroni.
Papyrus
Little
or,
tricky.
I can't,
In my head, I've decided to pronounce it Fiffle-Triggy. And I have no idea if that's how you pronounce it or not, but there's some P's and a bunch of F's. And
tricky.
so this in and of itself is exceptionally unlike Earth. Now, when I think I mentioned this in our very first discussion, there's kind of an ongoing joke in science fiction that in something like Star Trek, the way that you identify an alien is you take a human and then you put like a bony ridge on them somewhere, or you'll give them a strange skin color, make them blue or green, and then give them nose ridges or forehead bumps or something like that. But the vast majority of alien species, they look like modified humans. All right, like it's a human plus or minus something. What can he relate to having 3 completely separate intelligent species?
Which ones are in control?
Well, he immediately started, that's the only thing he can come up with. This is so unlike Earth. We don't have like humans working cooperatively with dolphins because we're not the same and we're not even all that similar. As intelligent as dolphins are, they don't have cities and societies and cultures, and none of them know how to play football. So there's interaction is still on a completely different scale, as to be a completely different thing. But the Harassa have described Malacandra as having 3 unique types of intelligent species. So Ransom has nothing to base that, he has nothing to connect that with. But the best that he can do is assume one's got to be in control. Why does he assume that?
That's how people work.
Because that's how we work. People work that if there's someone smarter or more capable, then they are in charge of those who are less smart or less capable. And that's the law of the West, right? So if you've got these 3 species, they're either at war with each other or there's some sort of hierarchy where one is in control. So what does he assume about the hierarchy?
He assumed that the Soren was the one that was using the others to his own advantage.
Yeah, he's sort of trying to piece together the Saroni must be in charge somehow. Why? Why does he assume the Saroni must be in charge?
They some sort of human-like description. They're bipeds.
Right, they did have that kind of somewhat human face.
They were the people that he was supposed to be taken to.
People who should be saying, okay, so we can already kind of make a connection there that they must have some sort of authority or power. Occasionally he will ask questions, and the Harassa or the one wise Frost will say, well, that's really that's the kind of thing the Saroni are interested in. And I think that gives the impression that the Saroni are maybe more intelligent or maybe more advanced as a civilization. Because remember, if the Harassa look like Stone Age, well, then if there's somebody beyond the Stone Age, then they're probably in charge. But every time he tries to figure that out, what happens?
He explains that no one is in charge, and he begins to show that each of the different villages do different things, which make the whole
Right.
for lifestyle.
So he picks like one thing, like, okay, these kind of somewhat academic questions about the positions of the stars or whatever. And, well, that's the sort of thing the Saroni are interested in. Oh, well, that must mean they're smarter. That must mean they're in charge. That must mean they control you or make you do stuff. But every time he tries to figure this out, the pushback is no. You put a Saroni in a boat and he's a dummy who doesn't know what to do. There's actually this cooperative fundamental understanding that these guys are good at this thing, we're good at this thing, and the other group is good at the other thing, and we all kind of depend on each other to be good at what we're good at, and that they will be good at what they're good at, and together it all works. The Fiffletriggy make stuff. The Saroni understand things, and or at least they understand kind of the intellectual side of it, but the Harasa seem to not only kind of do practical things like the hunting and the fishing, but they also seem to understand things in a very experiential way. In the sense of, they kind of laugh that the Saroni can't write poetry. And I would think we would consider poetry to be a kind of advanced cultural landmark.
I find it interesting that he has not encountered any writing, no marking on a cave wall or on parchment. He's not found any evidence of their putting things down on any surface.
Sure. And I think if you were to ask, they would probably say, well, that's the sort of thing the Saroni are interested in. Now he does see the Fiffletriggy have made things that have art to them, which is why he's got a kind of this what is like a gold bowl or a vase or something like that. And there were etchings and engravings. And so he could actually identify images and pictures and say, oh, that's what the Fiffletriggy, they must look like sort of frog-like. So I'm getting the very distinct impression that if one species doesn't have something we expect, one of the others does. And they sort of fit together. So if we're expecting written language, well, maybe one of them has it, but the other doesn't. If we're expecting visual art, maybe one of them has it and the others rely on that one. If we're expecting, so there's this really interesting kind of symbiotic, cooperative. I mean, there's zero, like, there seems to be no rivalry, but they are very distinct, and they're pretty happy with being who they are and not being the other guy. But it's not like a denigrated thing, other than they did think it was sort of funny to picture a Saroni, boating and fishing as well as they did. But there is a hierarchy. The Saroni are not in charge, but something is in charge. Someone is in charge. Who's in charge?
Oyarsa.
Oyarsa is in charge. And that is just like duh. It's not the Oyarsa. I've already told you that. Why are you so confused by Oyarsa being in charge? And so Ransom tries to understand this. So how does he try to understand the concept of Oyarsa?
Well, one thing he asked if they made the world.
That's right. So, okay, so this must be like a religious thing, Oyarsa. Are you trying to say that Oyarsa is, it's God? Or, and so what's their answer to that?
Malville, am I saying it?
Malelville.
Well, the young
Malelville the young
made the world.
made the world. What, everybody knows that, you dummy. And there's this kind of comical reversal where Ransom feels like he needs, maybe I should be teaching these guys some, give them an understanding about how the world works, maybe some catechetical religious instruction. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? But he winds up being taken to Sunday school.
Needs to learn.
So can you sketch out someone the rough cosmology of what the Rasa are trying to teach Ransom? How does the world work?
Okay, now Adele lives with the old one,
Yes.
and he tried to figure out where was the old one, and he doesn't have to be anywhere.
Right. He's not that sort. He's not that kind. So he's figuring out there's some concept of spirit. But Malelville is not Oyarsa, is not the Saroni, is not, these are all distinct. And there is a hierarchy here, but the hierarchy seems pretty simple, and it doesn't seem to be exploitive. It just kind of is. The Saroni do certain things well, the Rasa do certain things well, the Fifth Treaty do certain things well. Who rules them all? Oyarsa rules them all. Is Oyarsa all powerful? No. Malelville, yeah. So we're starting to get kind of an understanding of how they see the world works. And Ransom, who has come in thinking, again, if I'm an educated, intelligent, capable human, and I have now been put into a Stone Age village, it's sort of incumbent upon me to help educate them, to help raise them up. After all these discussions, what does he start to think about himself? Maybe I don't know so much after all. And as a matter of fact, when I start comparing human society to the society on Malacandra, what am I noticing?
It's a more preferred society.
Yeah, not only more preferred, he's kind of embarrassed and maybe even slightly frightened.
Where he doesn't tell them only one side of the human,
Right. Well,
because he's embarrassed at the other side of humanity.
yeah, why does he not tell them more?
Because it's a less peaceful life,
Yeah, it's kind of ugly, right?
more warrior-like.
Human history has plenty of ugliness to go around. Every culture, every time period, every nation, every people group. I mean, just two people together, and there's always something messed up about it.
There's always conflict.
Always, which he's yet to see any evidence of here. And he references an H.G. Wells story. And if you don't know that story, which I didn't, I had to look it up. But basically, the thought is everything is great in this real peaceful new society until they find out that I come from a place that sounds very dangerous. And so they have to kill me. Because if I told people what humanity was really like, I would probably just be a threat. So that's kind of maybe in the back of his head, like, boy, I came here thinking I was, I was the educated one. But now I'm having a lot of trouble and having to almost relearn from the beginning. And maybe the most fascinating concept, and I point this out to you because I'm hoping you caught it and it was interesting to you, but you're going to get this a lot. He tries to explain evil, and they don't get it. Did you catch that?
Yes.
What's the best word he can use to describe something evil or wrong or bad?
Mhm.
They have so little understanding of evil, wrong, or bad that he has the best word he can use is
Naive.
not naive, when he's trying to explain to them, bent,
What was it?
bent,
And
Oh, that's right.
bent. Like it's
Bent.
straight, bent. So when he's trying to describe, say, Weston and Divine, the best he can come up with that they can understand is bent. And I just want that kind of rolling in your head that we might call them naive in the sense of they don't understand or ignorant that they don't understand. But I'm going to say when we call something naive or ignorant, it comes with the supposition, I think, that they ought to know better, or I hope they will learn better. But what would happen if you were around a society and a culture where evil wasn't present? Would you want them to experience evil?
no,
No.
Oh, like all this, like, wow, wait a second. If that's actually true, that's what I would want for myself. I wish I was, if that's ignorance, I want to be ignorant. If that's naivete, I wish I were so naive because that's better. That's better. This is a very, very different world. Couple more things, because I know we're getting to where we need to close off. They understand at some level where he comes from. And they know he's trying to like, oh, the sky. You don't come from the sky, you dummy. You come from a planet like this. You come from some sort of landmass like us. And they are able to identify it. And they even know its name. What's the name they give to Earth?
Oh, Chandra.
Tholcandra. Not Malacandra like their planet, Tholcandra. And he asks them why. What do they say?
It means
Here we are. I'm on the bottom of page 68. Why do you call it Thol? So Handra or Andra means like landmass or ground or earth, terra firma. They are Malacandra. So why Thol, he asks?
silent.
Silent. And when asked for more, well, why call it silent? Well, that's the thing that the Saroni know. We don't, whatever. So our book is, the title is Out of the Silent Planet. Guess what the silent planet is?
the earth.
It's us. We are the silent planets. Now, what that means, we don't know yet. But we live on Tholcandra, the silent planet. And there's something about us that even Ransom doesn't understand, but seemingly everyone on Malacandra knows. And what that is, we're just going to have to discover as we play out. So one last thing is kind of it's not really a cliffhanger, but it's the transition in the next chapter. Way back when he first landed and he got too close to the water, he got scared by some snapping jawed creature. He happens to mention that to them. What is their response?
They're delighted.
Oh boy. They are super excited. Whatever this beast is, they haven't seen one in a long time, and it's a big deal. And they want to go catch it. There's going to be some big hunt, and everyone is as excited as they can be to go on that hunt. And I think that's where we are headed next. So anything else that you noted or were interested in or confused by?
Well, when they gave him the gold bowl,
From the Fiffle-Triggy?
yeah, then Ransom was thinking that that's why Divine,
Oh,
what he was interested in.
so Weston has already, again, I don't think Weston's a liar. Weston is evil, but I think he tells the truth. He's in it for, this is like the pure science of discovery and the conquering of humanity taking its rightful place in the universe. Divine, what's been divine's angle this whole time? It's just, there's been some kind of profit motive,
Yeah.
Way back.
something to exploit.
We talked about how you couldn't imagine how he had gotten his wealth and so
Right.
forth. So, yeah.
Well, what does Malacandra seem to have? Looks like gold. So there's probably why divine.
The vine is involved. There was a comment made about Oyarsa.
Yes,
He had no death and no young.
yes.
On
We are
on
saying-
page 70, yeah. Which made me think, is he like a god figure?
Well, he's clearly not the almighty creator God, because they say, no, that he did not make everything. Malel the Young made everything. Malel the Young who dwells with the old one. So Oyarsa isn't that. But like you said, Oyarsa is being described as having no death and having no young. So what we're supposed to make of that, I'm not sure yet.
Oh, is Oyarsa the old one?
No,
There's another.
Malel the Young does not live with them on Malacandra. That's Oyarsa, who rules Malacandra. Within this hierarchy that's starting to very slowly take shape, is somewhere above the Prasa, Saroni, and the Fifiltrigi, but somewhere below Malelville the Young and the Old One. Are we following that so far?
Mhm.
Yes,
Okay.
he also introduces Eldil.
Yeah, the L deal. So that happens right at the end. Thank you for bringing that up. What did you catch about L deal?
Well, they can't be seen by everyone.
Ransom can't see them. Who sees them when he's around? Like one of the Haras.
A little cub.
Yeah, and it's a cub. And they see something that he cannot perceive. So we're getting some of this, like just a piece at a time. A lot of pieces still to be put together.
The Haras can speak to them also,
Yes,
but he doesn't hear them.
right. He
Neither sees nor hears them at this point.
but they can.
And the creatures are also becoming actual characters with names.
That's right. Instead of this vague description of the best that I can do, he knows them by name, and even the descriptions become simpler and more clear. Like how he can tell the difference between. Again, his context is changing. He's understanding what he's seeing, and now he's able to describe it differently. So one last thing, he is starting to understand the topography of Malacandra, because through the process explanation, he's been able to piece together the things that he's seen that have not made sense. So if you didn't catch this, where they are even now, they are not on the surface of the planet. They
They're
are
in a valley.
valleys. They're living in the cracks and the seams. The Saroni live on the surface of the planet, which to them looks like the tops of these weird mountains, which are not weird mountains. Not if you live in a crack, which looks like land to them, but it's all a matter of perspective. So that should be a little clue about what planet they're actually on, but we can leave that because more will come. But that's just, I toss that out to you.
This book needs some diagrams.
That's something he's figured out. All right, so as far as next week is concerned, what would we like to read? We're going to start with chapter 12. How far would we like to go? I would suggest we go at least through 15. But whether or not we want to read further than that, that's up to you guys. But I would say at least to 15. Okay, so we want to just go 2:15?
Yeah.
Okay, so 12, 13, 14, 15. It's a little chunk, you know, but it's going to take us to kind of a nice thematic stopping point. So how are we doing?
Good.
I like it.
I said, I need diagrams to keep me straight.
Right.
I'm learning a lot of new vocabulary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you're learning it from a philologist, so we're getting vocabulary and root words and suffixes and how things grammatically work together. It's pretty neat. Okay,
Stretching your brain.
same time next week.
All right. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Then.
Right.